You've been buying flour your entire life, but chances are you've never stopped to ask a simple question: what is actually inside this bag? You walk into the grocery store, grab the same brand you've always grabbed, throw it in your cart, and move on. Because flour feels like the one product you don't have to think about. It's basic. It's familiar. It's dependable. But something has changed. Two bags sitting right next to each other can both say all-purpose flour on the front, yet one has two ingredients, while the other has a list that looks like it belongs in a chemistry textbook. And the biggest surprise? The price difference doesn't always tell the story. A more expensive bag isn't automatically better. A cheaper bag isn't automatically worse. The truth is hidden in places most shoppers never look: the ingredient label, the protein content, the company behind the brand, and how that flour actually performs when you bring it home. So I decided to take a closer look. I compared several popular flour brands you see every day, checked their ingredients, looked into ownership, compared prices, and even tested how they performed in the kitchen. What I found changed the way I look at the flour aisle forever. Because this story isn't just about flour. It's about how much we really know about the products we buy every week. For decades, flour seemed simple. Wheat was milled, placed into a bag, and sold. But modern flour has a much longer story. Most traditional wheat starts as a whole grain containing three main parts: the bran, the germ, and the endosperm. The bran contains much of the fiber. The germ contains many natural nutrients. The endosperm provides the starch and structure that makes flour useful for baking. But most conventional white flour goes through a process where the bran and germ are removed. This creates a softer, lighter product with a longer shelf life. Then comes the word many people recognize: enriched. When flour is enriched, certain nutrients that were removed during processing are added back in, usually including iron and B vitamins. This practice became common decades ago when governments wanted to address nutritional deficiencies. So the enriched flour on your grocery shelf isn't new. But the bigger change happened more recently. Over the past few decades, many familiar food brands have changed hands. Companies have merged, brands have been purchased, and production methods have shifted. The logo on the front of the bag may look exactly the same, but the company behind it, the mill producing it, and sometimes the formula itself may be different than what your family bought years ago. And that's why reading the label matters. Because the front of the bag is designed to catch your attention. The back of the bag tells the real story. When I looked at common brands like Gold Medal, Pillsbury, Great Value, King Arthur, Arrowhead Mills, and other regional flour brands, the first thing that stood out was the price. The cheapest options were often store brands. A 5-pound bag might cost only a few dollars. Meanwhile, specialty or premium brands could cost several times more. That means two bags sitting in the same aisle can have a huge price gap. But here's where things get interesting. Price alone doesn't tell you what you're getting. Sometimes you're paying extra because of the brand name. Sometimes you're paying for organic certification, special milling methods, or higher protein content. And sometimes you're simply paying more for packaging and marketing. The mistake many shoppers make is comparing only the sticker price. The better comparison is the price per pound. A 4-pound bag and a 5-pound bag might look almost identical sitting on the shelf, but you're not getting the same amount of product. Companies know that shoppers often look at the big number on the package and move on. That's why unit pricing matters. Now let's talk about the ingredient list. This is where I think many people would be surprised. One bag might say, unbleached wheat flour. That's it. Another bag might include wheat flour, malted barley flour, niacin, iron, thiamine, riboflavin, and folic acid. Both are sold as all-purpose flour. But they are not exactly the same product. A shorter ingredient list doesn't automatically mean something is healthier, but it does tell you that the flour has gone through fewer additions. Then there are words like bleached. Bleached flour has been treated to speed up the aging process and create a whiter, softer flour. Many bakers prefer unbleached flour because it develops naturally over time and tends to have a different texture and flavor. Another important word is whole wheat. Whole wheat flour keeps more of the original grain because the bran and germ remain. That changes the nutrition, texture, and even the way it behaves in recipes. Then there's protein. This is one of the biggest differences people overlook. When you buy flour, you're not just buying a white powder, you're buying a baking tool. Protein affects gluten development. Higher protein flour generally creates stronger dough that makes it better for bread, pizza dough, and recipes where you want structure. Lower protein flour creates softer, more delicate results, which is why it works well for cakes, pastries, and biscuits. 2 bags labeled all-purpose flour can have different protein levels. One might perform better for homemade bread, while another might be better for cookies or cakes. This explains why someone can use the same recipe they've made for years and suddenly get different results. Sometimes the problem isn't the recipe. Sometimes it's the flour. Then, there's another part of the story most shoppers never consider. Who actually owns the brand? When you look at the flour aisle, it appears like you're choosing between dozens of competing companies. But sometimes those choices are not as separate as they seem. Some major flour brands are owned by large corporations with many products under their umbrella. Store brands work differently. A grocery store may sell flour under its own label, but the actual mill producing that flour may not be obvious. That means the inexpensive bag sitting beside a famous brand could potentially come from a similar supplier or production network. Then you have companies like King Arthur and Bob's Red Mill, which stand out because they operate differently from many large corporate food brands. Understanding ownership doesn't mean every large company is bad or every small company is better. It simply means consumers deserve to know who they are buying from. Because the grocery shelf can create the illusion of endless choices, but sometimes the number of actual producers behind those choices is much smaller than we realize. And that isn't just true for flour. You see the same pattern across many grocery categories. A shelf full of different packages doesn't always mean a shelf full of different companies. Finally, I wanted to know whether these differences actually mattered. Were these just words on a label, or could you really see a difference? So I tested different flours in the kitchen, and the results were noticeable. Some doughs were firmer and required more effort to work with. Others were softer, smoother, and easier to handle. Some produced loaves with less rise. Others created taller bread with better structure and stronger oven spring. The difference wasn't just something written on the package. It showed up in the final product. A higher protein flour often created a stronger loaf with more volume. A lower protein flour produced a softer texture. And that doesn't mean one flour is always better. It depends on what you're making. If you're baking bread every week, you may want something different than someone who only makes pancakes, cookies, or holiday desserts. The biggest lesson here is not that one brand wins every category. It's that we need to stop assuming all flour is identical. The grocery store has changed. Products have changed. Companies have changed. And the only way to make better choices is to pay attention. Next time you pick up a bag of flour, spend 10 seconds looking at the back. Check the ingredients. Check the protein. Check the price per pound. Ask yourself who makes it. Because the most powerful tool you have as a shopper isn't a bigger budget. It's information. And sometimes the biggest changes in our grocery cart happen in the products we've stopped questioning.